Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. As we always do, we're breaking down the basics of all political issues and current political events so that you get to decide. Don't you just love it when your local pastor runs for the second highest political office in your state and wins? Me too. It didn't happen to my local pastor, but it happened to my friend and guest today, Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith. Let's just say his path to political leadership was atypical. A pastor, educator, and outspoken advocate for faith, freedom, and constitutional values, Beckwith went from leading a church to helping lead the entire state of Indiana. In the political world, we're used to seeing wins by career politicians. But Pastor Beckwith built a grassroots movement that connected with voters across Indiana and turned an unlikely campaign into a victory. Now serving as the 53rd Lieutenant Governor of Indiana, he certainly brings a fresh perspective to state government, and he's reminding us that back in the day in the good old USA, electing pastors to political leadership was the norm. All right, Lieutenant Governor, we're here. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm thrilled to have you with me today.
Hey, thank you so much for being you, Kyle. I mean, it's awesome that you're highlighting these amazing stories. And, you know, I'm just a vessel that God has used, but it's an amazing story, not because of me, but because I think what God is showing other Christians and other spiritual leaders, other pastors, what they can do when they engage in the civic square of our nation. And I think we're all called to do that to some extent. So thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, it's so great, and we're going to talk about all of that specifically today. Your story is really remarkable and not one that we hear very often. It's a story I wish that we did hear more often. So tell us the story, Micah. How did you go from being a pastor for, 15 years to deciding to run for such high political office there in Indiana?
Yeah, well, so I started off in music ministry. I was a worship pastor, and I got involved in, just ministry, kind of not because I wanted to, but God sort of led me into that path. I was going to go into business. I was an entrepreneurial kind of background person. My parents owned a business. We were in the dairy industry. And so went to school for that, but got involved in the Christian band. Christian band had a couple, big, national successes in the Christian music industry. And so I ended up, getting involved in touring the country with Christian musicians. And then when I got out of that, I ended up, my wife and I got married. The church we were going to at the time had an opening for a worship pastor position, and it was really a director. It was kind of a part-time role. I got involved in that, and it was primarily in the youth ministry. So it was a pretty big church. So we had a youth ministry worship, team, and so I led that. And I was late 20s, early 30s, and just really had a heart for students. And probably about 2014, 2015, I started seeing a shift, at least in my ministry, my students, where they were being fed all these lies from schools. I mean, you had the transanity that was kind of, taking the world by storm. You had anti-American sentiment that was really starting to root and show its ugly face. And students were starting to say things that were just off the wall crazy. I had one student that told me, communism is the best form of governance this world has to offer, and he hoped that America was a communist nation someday. And I was like, well, that's stupid if you know history. And I love history, so I've studied history my whole life. And I was like, if you know history, you know that communism has killed and murdered more innocent people in the 20th century than any other movement by far. And so there was stupid things like that they started saying. And then I had students that would say, hey, I can identify in whatever gender I want to be. There's more than 2 genders. There's 50 genders or 12 genders, or Facebook, I think, says 76 genders or whatever it is. And I'm like, this is dumb. What are you guys doing? And I recognized something very important, that the church stepped out of government back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. We've slowly just abandoned that space, and the devil has taken it over. And schools are our government agency. They're not public schools, they're government schools. And so when Christians abandon any space, the vacuum will always be filled by the devil and his voices. And so I went to the church I was working at the time and said, hey, we got to get involved in some of these school board races and start pushing back on some of these lies that are being told to our students, because I'm really getting tired of having to, sort of deprogram them every Sunday when they come to youth group because they've been lied to for, 5 days in the public school, bureaucratic agency. And the church, kind of made a pretty typical statement, I think, for most churches. They said, well, we don't get political. And I said, well, you're not getting political, and you're in these tithe-built bubbles behind a pulpit. The devil is picking off our kids left and right out in the real world. And I would imagine that Psalm 23, when the Lord says to carry a staff and a rod, that we also should pull out the rod, which is the weapon, and go to war with evil if it's hurting our sheep. And so I said, I'm going to start getting involved. So in 2016, I just started showing up, and people asked me, say, how do you get involved? What should you do? And I just said, show up. I ran for a precinct committeeman, became a delegate in our state convention process in the party, and I just started going to more political party function things. I didn't know many people. I just started getting involved. And then one thing led to another. In 2020, God just kind of pushed me into a congressional race. And so that was wild. 15 candidates. I'm this youth pastor. And, I ended up raising about $170,000 for a congressional race, which is not much. Actually, I take it back. It was about $140,000 now that I think about it, and which is not much at all. And we ended up taking third place out of 15 candidates, and many of these candidates were very well qualified political, long-term career politicians that we beat. And so people were kind of like, "Who's this Micah guy? How did that happen?" We had a great grassroots ground game and had a good message. And so then I didn't know what was going to happen. I left my worship pastor position and got involved in a church that really became the foundation of what I'm doing now. And this church is very much keen on getting involved in politics. And so the lead pastor, a good friend of mine, he just basically said, "Hey, I want you to come work for me be a campus pastor, preach." And that's when COVID was going on. And so we became probably one of the 2 or 3 churches in Indiana that started saying, "Hey, constitutionally, the government doesn't have a right to keep you in your home, keep you from going to church, force you to wear masks, force you to get a vaccine against your will." And so we started writing religious exemptions from our church, which, blew up. People were just like, "Oh my gosh, there's this church and these pastors that are defending my liberty." And, you got to remember, liberty is not man's idea, it's God's idea. And so then that catapulted me into more name idea around the state. And then, and I hate to be so, long with the story, but it is important.
Keep it going. This is fascinating.
So after we started defending the liberties of people during COVID, we wrote about 4,500 religious exemptions for people in the state of Indiana to keep them in their jobs, keep them from getting kicked out of school, court-martialed in the military. COVID in 2020 was a fascinating time. It really was. I know it was a hard time for a lot of people, but it was really fascinating in how our Constitution was created so brilliantly by these amazing men who knew what God's word said to protect us from government overreach. And states that followed the Constitution became very successful during COVID, and you can see them still flourishing. States that didn't are hurting, and still to this day are still trying to dig out of that hole that they made for themselves. And so in about 2022, our governor at the time wasn't very good when it came to COVID. He really looked a little bit more like probably he looked too much like a wannabe Gavin Newsom and less like a Ron DeSantis, right?
Remind
so that's kind of,
Micah, who your governor was in 2020. Is it still the same person who's leading the state now?
No. So it was Governor Eric Holcomb in 2020. That would have been he would have been on his second term, and we're 2 terms as our term limits in Indiana. So he was in the end of his term, or he was in his second term. So he really had no political, aspirations after this. So he just kind of did whatever he felt he should do. There was no, I don't care what the political consequences are going to be. And man, I tell you what, he did some things that were not very good, and Hoosiers did not like him. And so it really was unfortunate, because I think a lot of people think Indiana is a strong red state. Our governors, throughout years past have been amazing. Well, we've got our problems too, and not, we've got our Indianapolis Republican, our country club Republicans, like Rush Limbaugh used to call them, and we got a lot of those in Indiana. And so I just started speaking out. I got a weekly radio spot, one of the largest conservative radio programs in the state, and just started saying, "Hey, this is what the Bible says. This is what the Constitution says that backs up what the Bible says. And this is what your politicians are doing, which is not what the Bible says or the Constitution says." And so I had an interesting meeting that happened in about 2022. A friend of mine, more of an acquaintance, he ran for attorney general. And the way we pick our 5 statewide offices, attorney general, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, comptroller, and treasurer, is in a state convention. So the nominating process is not a primary. It is a state convention. 1,800 delegates get elected in the primary, and then a month later they go down to the state convention and they get to vote on these nominations. And typically, if you win the nomination at the convention in Indiana, you're probably going to win the general in November. So the nomination is really important. And so I'd been a delegate. I knew the delegate process, but I never thought about this simple fact that we've never really picked a lieutenant governor at the state conventions. We've chosen between AGs, Secretary of States, treasurers, and comptrollers, but the lieutenant governor has always been voted on by the delegates, but the delegates are always told who to vote for by the governor or the governor-elect, right? And so in 2022, I had a friend of mine, he ran for AG, and he sat down and he said, hey, have you ever thought about running for lieutenant governor? I was kind of like, I don't think we do it that way in Indiana. He said, you're right, but you could. Right? So yes, traditionally, we've always done as delegates whatever the gubernatorial nominee tells us to do, but you don't have to do that. You could essentially get the delegates to break with the gubernatorial nominee and just vote for whoever they wanted. And so it was the Lord started planting those seeds of give the delegates a choice. And so in 2022, we knew we had about a year and a half. 24 was going to be the convention. So I started going around to all the Lincoln days, all the local county parties, and said, hey, I'm going to run for lieutenant governor. People would look at me like I was crazy. They would say, we don't do it that way. Is this legal? Is this constitutional? We thought the governor picks. I'm like, no, listen, this is how you do it. And started educating the state on how the process works. And these were Politico people. Like these were people that knew politics and they never thought of it. They were like, oh my gosh, like, I guess you could do it this way. And so we were off to the races. And then we had a pretty contentious 5-way gubernatorial primary. Governor Braun, or then U.S. Senator Mike Braun, won. And he picked a different gal. Now, him and I have always been friends. We were never contentious. So he just had a different idea for what he wanted in lieutenant governor. But he said, hey, if Micah wins the convention, then great. We'll do well together. So he picks a state rep who is from Indianapolis area. And he says, that's who I want to be my lieutenant governor. And so we go into the convention. She only has about 30 days to campaign. See, I've been campaigning for about a year and a half. So that was a huge, secret to this strategy. I was very much working this for a long time, and it's retail politics. It's, it's the Bill Clinton style politics back in Arkansas in the 1980s and the early 1990s, that's why he was so popular in Arkansas, because he was getting out, shaking hands, just, and I don't praise Bill Clinton, but I'm saying he knew how to win just the average person over to his side. And I've always remembered that. While I don't like his politics, his strategy was really good. And so I was like, okay, if I can get to these 1,800 delegates in a year and a half, I can convince them to vote for me. So that's what I did. I remember driving 2 hours, Kyle, to take 2 delegates out to coffee. 2 delegates. So you can't do that.
You put in
a
the
normal,
work. You really, did the boots on the ground work. It's interesting hearing you talk about this. I think that's why we're seeing some of this new wave of campaigning do so well out here in California with the Spencer Pratt in Los Angeles and Steve Hilton across the state, because they're doing the same thing. They are putting in the time and the work and the energy, and they're going and they're talking to people in different neighborhoods. They're talking to kind of people who have kids going to schools in some of the lower socioeconomic status communities. Spencer Pratt's holding the barbecues and having all the, people who are of different sort of ethnic groups and culturally very, very diverse coming out and just shaking the hands and talking to them. And you're seeing that what we saw on primary Tuesday, Steve Hilton, who we do hope becomes our governor.
There you go.
He did so well across the state in the small little communities. And I think that what you did is part of that strategy is this new wave that's coming. And we've got to get back to that more traditional way of campaigning. But I love how you kind of broke out of the norm also and said, well, why don't we do it this way? Why don't we give the delegates a choice? That's remarkable. And that's so fascinating, too, that's how the system works there in Indiana. So what ended up happening? How did the vote go for you?
Yeah, so I campaigned. I got a lot of churches involved, and this is the beautiful thing of what happened. So I really felt like the Lord said, Micah, go and wake up my people to why they need to engage, but then help them engage, help them to know what to do. So we went around the state and we went to churches and we said, hey, this is what a delegate is. And most of the time you ask anyone in Indiana, do you know what a delegate is? They have no idea. Do you know what they do? No, they have no idea. And so we started educating. Hosea 4:6 says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. So say, hey, listen, if we want Indiana to thrive, we can't be ignorant people. And so we started teaching. Now, there were two churches specifically. Now, we have about 7,000 churches in Indiana as a whole, but there were two churches specifically, my church and one church up in the northwest part of the state. And they're fairly bigger churches. And they said, hey, we're going to really latch onto this. Let's help our people get involved in being a delegate. And it's pretty easy to win a delegate race. And it's a 1-day commitment every 2 years. I mean, actually it's you serve 1 day and then you're done. And then you got to run again in 2 years if you want to be delegate again. So it's really a simple commitment. It's not hard, but it's a great way to get involved in the process. And so we started, telling these churches, well, these two churches said, we love it. We're going to teach our people what it is, and we're going to sign people up to run for delegate. Well, collectively, between those two churches, there were 63 delegates that got elected just from those two churches. Now, you may say, well, that's not a lot of people. Well, in the grand scheme of about 1,700 delegates that ended up showing up at the convention, 63 is a pretty good chunk of voters, right? And so they all come down to the convention and they're supporting me, obviously. And so, they're fired up. Well, then the vote happens, right? So we get up on stage, we make our speeches. I give my speech, and the energy is super electric from my side. We just had such an amazing group of people that weren't even delegates that came down and were standing outside the convention with signs. That's huge. I mean, some people are like, well, I'm not a delegate. Can I do anything? Yes, you can show up and bring energy, because when other people see the energy, they're like, wow, something's happening here. And I think that's important for the church to remember, for Christians to remember, is you don't have to be an elected official. You just showing up and being excited for what God is doing will draw people into what God is doing. And so that's what happened. And so the voters vote, and we're working the lines and shaking hands. My wife is on one side of the room, I'm on the other side of the room, and it was really interesting because you can only believe, the only person you can ever believe when they tell you, are they going to vote for you or not, are the people that look you in the eyes and say, I'm not voting for you, right? And so nobody knew where people were really standing. The delegates were pretty close to the vest in what they were going to do. I had one friend of mine who saw my opponent's sticker on his on one of his friend's vests, and he went over and he said, hey, I thought you were voting for Micah. And the friend opened up his jacket, and there was a Micah sticker underneath. And he said, no, I just have to wear this because I have contracts with the government. I can't tick off the establishment.
I love it. That's so Trump 2026.
Oh, totally.
Lifting up the sweatshirt, and you got the Trump t-shirt underneath.
Totally. It's totally that. So it was fascinating. Now, let me step back, and I'll tell you the result here in a second. Let me step back. This is crazy. The week leading up to the convention, all the endorsements were going for my opponent, right? And she's actually a good legislator. She's a conservative, and she's in the state house, and she's actually a really good legislator. But all the endorsements, the Speaker of the House, the pro tem of the Senate, anyone who's anyone in government was endorsing my opponent. And it's Thursday before the convention. So Friday we have to go to the convention, and Saturday is when the convention happens. And Thursday night I'm doing one last town hall and just a meet and greet. And my phone starts blowing up on Thursday, and people are texting me like, "Oh, Micah, we're so sorry. Oh, we're so sorry. Like, this is unfortunate. It probably isn't going to happen." I'm like, "What happened?" Well, President Trump came in and endorsed my opponent. Now, he didn't know her.
I didn't realize that happened. Oh,
yeah, he didn't know her. And listen, I'm a huge Trump fan. I think he's doing great things. He didn't know either one of us. What had happened was, Senator Braun had a good relationship with President Trump, still does. And so he was really saying, Mr. President, we need you to, come in and do this. Now, I found out later that President Trump really didn't want to do it. He was like, there's no win for me in this. Like, these are my people. All of them are my people. Why would I come in and, potentially tick off half of a room that essentially is, for me, right? But he kind of said, okay, hey, will she win? If I give the endorsement, make sure she wins, right? And so, oh yeah, you got the endorsement. If you come in with the endorsement, that's the nail in the coffin, right? So we found all this out after this had happened. So I'm like driving home from that meet and greet on Thursday night. I'm like praying. I'm like, Lord, what is going on? This is ridiculous and just doesn't, I just want to honor you, but it doesn't look good. And I heard the Lord just kind of speak to me so clearly. He said, I'm stacking the deck against you. And I was like, what? Excuse me? Come again? I feel like you said you're stacking the deck against me. And it's kind of like in that Top Gun scene when Maverick says, I'm going to bring him in closer, they're like, what? You're doing what? Like, Mav, like, we need to go faster. He's like, I'm bringing them in closer. I'm going to slam on the brakes and they're going to fly right by, right? And so I felt like the Lord was saying, hey, I'm bringing them in closer. I'm stacking the deck against you so that when you win, you can't take the glory for it. Right? You can't take the credit for it. No one's going to look at you and say, oh, well, Micah is the one who made this happen. They're going to look at this whole situation. They're going to be like, what just happened? Right? And so I heard that on Thursday and I knew the Lord said that to me, but it was weird because you're still going in and thinking, oh man, okay, Lord, I trust you, but this is wild. Like I really trust you, but boy, help my unbelief. Right? Because it's kind of one of those moments. And so we go to Saturday and we give our speeches, we shake hands, voters are going. We knew that week earlier, I got a call, an accidental call, because I was a delegate as well myself. And so I could vote. I ran for delegate so I can vote for myself. I get a call from this lady who's doing polling. And now we didn't have the money to do polling, but we get a call and I'm driving in the car and this lady calls me. She says, hello, this is so-and-so. I'm just doing a survey on the upcoming convention. I was wondering who you'll be voting for as a delegate in the upcoming convention. Will you be voting for, and she said my opponent's name, or will you be voting for, and then she said my name, and as she said my name, she recognized the name she's calling is the candidate, and she starts laughing, right? She's like, oh my goodness, and so I said, yeah, well, obviously know who I'm voting for. Yeah. Well, she starts talking to me and we just kind of kick it off. And I feel like this was like a God wink, right? So this was like on Tuesday before the Trump endorsement came in. And she said, we didn't really know how we were doing out there, right? Like we felt like we were doing well, but she said, hey, I don't know why I'm telling you this. But I just want you to know that there's a lot of people that are out there supporting you.
That's great.
And so for a pollster to say that, like to the candidate of the other team, it's probably not like, she'd probably get fired for that. But I just remember thinking, oh, thanks, Lord. Like that was really encouraging. And so then we walk into the convention, we start hearing rumors that the polling on the other side, they're starting to get nervous because it's a third for me, a third for my opponent, and then a third undecided, right? So that's kind of how it was close. And so it was going to come down to the convention. It was going to come down to how do you shake hands, talk to voters, how was your speech, your convention floor speech, all of that stuff was so important. And so I get up there and I feel like Lord just really, had his hand in it and it went really well. And then they're taking a while to count the votes. And, and that the longer they were taking is the better I started feeling. Cause I'm like, oh, I don't think they like what they're seeing. Right. Come to find out they counted 3 times because they were like, this can't be happening. Right. And remember, I told you there were 63 delegates that we sent from these 2 churches to the convention. And so the chairman of the convention comes up and he says, by a margin of 63 votes, Micah Beckwith is the winner, right? So
by that exact amount,
by that exact number of those 2 churches that said we're going to engage and God's calling us to go back into the public square to be a voice of truth. We're going to engage. We're going to teach our people why it's important. The biblical principle of, Jeremiah 29:7, seek the peace of the city, for if the city prospers, there you too will prosper as well. Why that applies to today. And so those 2 churches sent 63 delegates to the convention, and I won by the exact number of 63 votes. So out of 7,000 churches in Indiana, 2 said, you know what, we're going to do something about this. And they literally did something that was historic that had never been done in Indiana. They changed the course of history. Now I'm in there, and I'm the bane of the existence for the establishment, rhino, leftist, Marxist movement in Indiana. They hate my guts, and they're like, how did this guy get here, and what can we do to get him out? And I'm like, hey, the Lord put me here because God's people moved when he called them to move, and that's why I'm the lieutenant governor. So it's pretty cool story.
Yeah. This is such a good story. And for those 6,998 churches who did nothing, let that be also a cautionary tale in that you had to watch just two churches step up and do what you all should have done.
Yeah.
And across history in this country, we have watched when people of faith and when faith leaders and churches do engage in the political sphere, right? Which affects everything that you are already preaching about, everything that every person in your congregation is experiencing on a day-to-day basis, dealing with every day. It has touch points across our lives all the time. When people of faith engage, big, positive, exciting things happen. I mean, we keep talking about 2016, but that was a massive evangelical voter turnout. I just watched that film, The Great Awakening. Again, just look how God has raised people up just as he raised you up, and he's using you for so much good. I love stories like this. It's amazing. And now you have the power. you have so much power.
I don't know about that. I've got influence, right? Like the lieutenant governor still.
I'm gonna go ahead and think that you have a lot of power. Well, let's talk about that. You know, because at Politically Basic here, we do kind of answer those questions that people think they should already know, that they should already have the information. Like, oh, I absolutely know what a lieutenant governor does. A lot of people don't know even what that position is for and what it does. Now, I know that you sit on some committees. You are in charge and you oversee certain things, but it's not necessarily like a vice president to a president. A vice president doesn't really have many official duties other than to support the president. How is lieutenant governor position different?
So in every state, it's a little bit differently. So you can't say, well, all lieutenant governors do this. It's been really interesting getting to know the lieutenant governors from around the country. I was just in D.C. with a bunch of them on Monday and Tuesday for an aerospace conference. And they all have different roles. They all have maybe more authority or not. Indiana's a pretty robust lieutenant governor position. We're probably not the most robust. I would say out of the whole country. If you want to look at somebody who's a lieutenant governor that has a lot of power, it's really Texas, Dan Patrick in Texas. The lieutenant governor really has a ton of power. And some people even say has more influence and power than even the governor has because he appoints all the Senate committee chairs, and he is the president of the Senate. Indiana, I am the president of the Senate as well. I do not have the authority to appoint committee chairs. That's the difference. That's the Senate pro tem has the authority to do that. So the majority, the caucus, the leader of the majority caucus is the pro tem, and so that's where that role goes. But constitutionally, I'm the president of the Senate. I cast a tie-breaking vote if there's ever a tie. In Indiana, it doesn't happen very often because we're a supermajority red state. But there have been times, and there were some times in the last couple sessions where I didn't cast a tie-breaking vote, but it was real close, and I had to be ready in case that happened. And then I'm there in case of an emergency. Obviously, a heartbeat away from the governor's office. God forbid anything happens there. But then statutorily is where kind of all the other authority or responsibilities can be added in. So in Indiana, statutorily, I am the Secretary of Agriculture as well, which goes great with my background. My parents were in the dairy industry for many years, and so got to know that industry well. And so I get to serve our farmers and our agriculture world well. And then I'm also oversee the Office of Community and Rural Affairs, which is probably agriculture is really big too, but the one that's really, I think, takes up more of my time is Okra, because it's really revitalization of small town America. And then all of the HUD grant funding goes through us, and then we work with federal grants to get them into the hands of local officials that are looking to bolster their economic viability or their town's infrastructure. So that's been really cool. So I say this: I'm, as lieutenant governor in Indiana, I'm really over all things small town Indiana. So agriculture, small main streets, making sure Main Street Americana comes back to life. We don't want to lose that, and I think it's a national security issue because you lose that heartbeat of downtown Main Street, small town America, you lose America, right? So this has been really fun for me to be in this role, and I love it. And so that's those are the two main things that I oversee statutorily. I do sit on some committees as well, housing and a couple other. I'm on the 250 committee, that I sit on as well. But yeah, those are the two big agencies that I oversee. So
yeah, really critical for the state. And I love that you're over ag. You have that ag authority. Yeah, well, like you said, with your background, that's a perfect fit for you. Let's talk about Indiana, because on this show, of course, we talk a lot about California, right? As California goes, so do many of the states in this nation, and we're California based. But we also, we touch a lot on some of those states that have a lot going on politically, New York, Florida, Texas, but we don't often talk about Indiana that much. How many people live there? What are some of your biggest issues? You mentioned it's kind of got more of small town related issues that you focus on. What are some of your bigger issues there in the state?
Well, I think the Indiana, we're about 7 million people, give or take, on a good day. And we have some really important, I would say, drivers to the national just economy. Agriculture is probably the big one. Automotive's really big. We have a lot of manufacturing. We're a red state. Haven't always been a red state. We were blue back in Obama. I think in 2008 we went blue. But that was sort of the end of the blue dog Democrats being in the Democrat Party. Obama kind of was that last hurrah for the Democrats. The Democrats, the further they've gone away from godly truth, which really happened I would say it happened in 2012 at the Democrat National Convention when they kicked God out of their national platform. You started to see all the craziness. Romans 1, God gives them over to their own foolishness, and so now these blue dog Democrats in the southern part of Indiana, which was always a very strong Democrat part of our state, they all were like, we're not going to go along with this transgender nonsense, abortion on demand, this defund the police, open borders, all of this stuff that is just absolutely crazy. And so they started coming into the Republican Party. So Indiana kind of has yes, we're a red state, but we're probably a little bit more blue dog red. And so while people vote red, I think we have to make sure we really kind of become a conservative state or a conservative leader. You don't talk about Indiana because Indiana typically doesn't lead on bold conservative issues. You got Florida, you got Tennessee, you get Texas, right? You get sometimes Arkansas or Oklahoma. You'll hear about those states a little bit more, but in Indiana typically will do what they're doing. It just takes us a couple of years to get the courage to do that, right? So what I'm trying to do is to bring courage back into the conversation with our legislators, say, have a backbone, right? Fight for this nation, fight against this Marxist wave and this radical Islamism that's trying to destroy the future of our nation, and stand up. And so I probably give most of these, old time Republicans, ulcers a lot, I would imagine, by the things I say and do. But I'm kind of like, hey, listen, President Trump taught us how to fight. We need to do that. And Indiana probably has a lot more of a Mitt Romney wish, right? Like you have the leaders and I say this from the leadership of our state. Now, this isn't Governor Braun. Please hear me out. This is more our legislature. Governor Braun, I think, is doing a good job fighting and kind of pushing. But the legislature is the most powerful branch by far in Indiana. And so our legislators need to step up, and they need to have a backbone occasionally. And they probably wish things were like it used to be with Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, or with back in the Reagan and Tip O'Neill days, where Democrats and Republicans were basically the same. Everybody hated communism, and we just have different tax policies, and and abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, and all stuff. Well, I'm sorry, the Democrat Party isn't that party anymore. I mean, we fought against the communists as the Democrats back in the JFK era. Now the Democrats want to be the communists. And so it's not going back. And I think a lot of these old-time Republicans, these establishment types, are like, oh, I just so wish for the days of Ronald Reagan. It's like, guys, I do too, but that's not reality. And now we have radical Marxists and Islamists that have taken over the Democrat Party. What are you going to do about it? And the only thing you can do is do what President Trump has taught us to do, which is fight. And so you might have seen Indiana in the news back in the end of the year last year, the beginning of the year this year, because we did not redistrict, right? We tried. Governor Braun, myself, the president, we were pushing the redistrict. Well, we have a squishy Senate. And we have 50 senators, 40 of them are Republicans, and only probably about 16 of them are actually bold conservatives. And so we were not able to get redistricting through. But then President Trump, he was true to his word. He came in, and I went out and found and helped to recruit a lot of these candidates that ran against these squishy Republicans. And really, I say squishy. Yes, some of them were very squishy. There was a couple that were like, they were just bold-faced rhinos, and they didn't even hide it. Some of them were conservatives, truly conservatives. That Kyle, if they were doing a litmus test of what they believe on the issues, they would probably score exactly how you and I would score. But they didn't know what time it is in America. Like they're like, yeah, I believe everything you believe. Yeah, but you're not willing to fight for it. And what I learned is I don't want just conservatives anymore. I want conservatives who will fight for conservative values. And so we actually had this huge win in the primary back May 5th in Indiana. And out of the incumbents that were running, there was 6 incumbents up on the Republican side that were trying to hold on to their seat. There were a few that were retiring, so those were open seats. But there were 6 incumbents that were holding on to their seats that voted against redistricting that we were targeting. And we won 5 of those seats. And potentially we might win the 6th. I'm sorry, there were 7. We won 5. The 6th might actually, it's in a recount right now. She's down by 3. She works in my office. She's a great gal. She's down by 3. She was challenging the incumbent senator in her district. And so we're going to see if we can flip it. But I think that totally embodied what Indiana is. People looked at Indiana after the fail of the redistricting. They said, what happened to Indiana? How could they not redistrict? We thought they were like deep red and all in on MAGA and all this stuff. And it's like, well, the people are, but our legislators aren't.
Well, that's really interesting. And I think that you're hitting on the theme here. You know, I'm a generalist. I interview people who have expertise in every political issue, but I also really like the science of politics. I like elections. I like campaigns. And taking a step back, I think you've really tapped into the shifting of the culture of political leadership and what constituents want. The constituents, the American public has moved. The leadership has not. And I think that that's something we're a little bit slow to catch on to here. And I really want to talk about this because you keep saying you need leadership who's got to fight. And I think that is exactly the key. And I want to hear from you on this. And I really want to express and have people understand what's going on from a more general, broad sense here. This isn't Trump saying, hey, I don't like those rhinos because they're not with me and I want to replace them with MAGA. This is, we have gotten so far adrift in the people who hold political office not representing the will of the people. They are self-serving. They are beholden to donors. Look at what's happening with the SAVE Act, right? Look at the Senate. Look how John Thune has just completely lost the ability to get them to move on anything. I mean, it's like, why are you there? What is the point of having a House and a Senate if you're not going to accomplish anything when you have both of those legislative bodies and the executive? And if you can't move when you have the trifecta, what good are you? And so I really want people to understand that this is now the referendum on those senators, on those representatives, to get in there. And are you going to actually work for the people, or are you going to work for yourself and your donors? And I think that's probably a big part of why you won, too, is that you made the case. And people want the opportunity to look at someone fully, look at their background, look at their experience and what they're offering, and make a decision based on that. Look at this Graham Plattner nonsense. The Democrats did not vet this human. They didn't care. He has the right letter by his name. He has people giving him money because he's making these shocking histrionic comments, and he's going to go into the Senate and blow it up from the inside out. And there are people who want to see that happen, so they'll give him money, and the Democrats say, great, look at this guy. He's a fighter. He's got money backing him. And now all of this nightmare background is coming out, and they're stuck. They can't replace him. So I want to hear from you on how people can follow in your footsteps. Maybe, Micah, they're afraid. They're not as much of a fighter as you are. I know you like to poke the bear. I know you do. I know you like to get online and cause trouble because you're not afraid. I do. And maybe you have good people of faith out there who say, hey, I want to get into this fight, but I'm worried. I'm worried for my family's safety. I don't think I have a thick enough skin. I don't know if I can hack this. Let's talk about how people can fight successfully and move those biblical principles more into our world of political leadership in a safe way?
Great question. I get that a lot. People say, how can I get involved? I don't want to be you though, right? Like I don't want to run for office. I know I'm not supposed to. I'm not equipped for the fight. Whereas I know God made me to be the tip of the spear, throw me into a room full of Graham Plattners, and I'm in heaven, right? Like they don't believe in heaven because they're atheist Marxists, but I'm in heaven. I'm like, this is awesome. Let's go. Like you try to get me off of my worldview because I know the truth comes from heaven, and heaven's truth always works. And I think it's hilarious to watch the Democrats just twist themselves into pretzels to defend Graham Plattner when, just a few years ago, they were just blasting, Trump for some of these same issues and saying, oh, well, he can't, do that. I mean, they call us Nazis, and now they got a guy running with a literal Nazi tattoo on his body. Like they call, all the Republicans Epstein Island Republicans. And now you got a guy that has all these, social or these sexual escapades that have been coming out and really even borderline, if not all the way to sexual assault, right? I mean, it's crazy, like all this stuff, and they just twist themselves into the pretzel. It's like, well, we hate Trump, and we need somebody to, push back on the oligarchy, right? Like, what does that even mean? And so, but anyway, I think people recognize it's a battle, right? You will, if you become a politician, you will be ripped to shreds in the media. If you're a Christian conservative, you will be ripped to shreds in the media. You will be threatened, right? There will be death threats on your life. There'll be cancel culture. Like maybe if you lose, you won't ever be able to work in certain industries anymore. I mean, there's a whole lot of risk that comes when those frontline warriors go out to battle, which is just, that's war, right? And we are in an ideological war right now. But the Old Testament, that was the same thing. Men had to go out to the front lines. I mean, Uriah was on the front lines. That's how he died, right? I mean, David sent him there, obviously, but like it's risky, right? When you go and you fight these battles. But the Lord showed me this vision, and he broke it down into 4 steps for people. And that's what I tell people. Say, hey, listen, you don't need to be me. If God's calling you to be me, then be me. Like go be the tip of the spear. But the Lord said, he said, Micah, I made you to be the tip of the spear. And he showed me this picture. I remember it was just a vision he gave me. It was in my mind's eye. I saw this, and it was a beautiful spear. And he highlighted the tip. He said, I made you that way. Like I know you like to fight, and I know you're ready for throw me into the hottest part of the battle, and I'll be loving it, right? But he said, but look at the rest of the spear. That tip of the spear would be powerless if the rest of the spear didn't do its job. And then he highlighted the shaft. That was the power behind the spear. He said that's the power, because that spear cannot go far or even powerfully if it doesn't have that weight behind it, which is the shaft of the spear. He said, those are the people that I've given the gift of encouragement to. So people who need to encourage those who are the tip of the spear, right? The tip of the spear is one of the smallest parts of the spear, right? But it's the part that does the killing. But the largest part of the spear is what most people don't even think about when they think of a spear, right? It's just the shaft. And he said, those are the people that I'm calling them to encourage the Micah Beckwiths or the Kyle Campbells or the President Trumps that are going into these really, dark and dangerous places. They need the encouragement, right? Then he showed me the rope that holds the tip of the spear onto the shaft of the spear. And he said, Micah, that rope has to be tight, has to be a good rope. It holds the whole thing together. If that rope doesn't do its job, then the tip and the shaft, they fall away from each other. And he said, those are the people I've gifted with the passion to pray. Those are the intercessors. Those are the prayer warriors. You'll never know who they are. You never think about the rope when you think about a spear, right? And he said, but they are the ones that are keeping this very, very tight. Right? They're keeping this all together so that the thing functions well, right? And then he showed me, he said, how much do you think it takes to build a spear like that? How much money went into that spear? He said, this is a very nice spear. It's not cheap, right? And he said, and those are the people that I've gifted with wealth, and they have to fund it. And I'm calling them to use their funding, their money, their resources. I bless them financially, and now they're being used to lay those financial blessings into this battle, and they have to build it, right? And then he showed me a picture of a hand picking it up and throwing it into the battle exactly where it needed to go, hitting its enemy, hitting its target every time. And he said, Micah, that's my hand. And I pick that spear up and I throw it wherever. I throw it, here and there. You're not doing the throwing, right? Don't think you are. Like, I'm sending you into battle, but it all has to come together. And so I tell people, I say, so where do you see yourself in that vision? Are you the tip of the spear? Because you'll know it. Like God starts to reveal to you your strengths and your weaknesses. Maybe you're not, but maybe you love to pray. Well, you're probably being called to pray for those who are going into battle.
That's a beautiful analogy. I love that so much. And you're going to know if you're the tip, right? You're going to know if you're the fighter. Because you're like me, Micah, when I finally met you in person recently and we were kind of joking around and you said you were upsetting some people on social media. That was what I was there talking about. I said, oh, this is my kind of person. Politician, believer, loves getting into it with people on social media. You're going to know if you're that kind of person who's built for that, who has, that tough skin, nothing sticks, it all rolls off. And really at the end of the day, we're here to educate. We're here to educate in love, but there are people you have to kind of go at it. You got to go right at the center of the target with some people too. So I love that analogy. I've only got you for a few more minutes, but I want to ask you something that I think is one of the most important things that we can hear from you on right now. You're coming from the church, you're coming from faith leadership as a pastor. The church is still building back from COVID, I believe, from the pandemic. A lot of churches got shut down and a lot were made to just be fearful that government and those who wish to see the church not exist anymore could trump the Constitution and could actually shut them down and silence them. That is not legal. That is not what the Constitution says. That's not what our First Amendment right protects us from, that very thing. But as these pastors in these churches work their way back to understanding that they have the legal foundation and a cultural responsibility being in the United States of America, a country built on the foundations of biblical truth and wisdom and the Ten Commandments, and men whose main form of influence when writing these governing documents was the Bible. What should church look like today? What should preaching look like? What should we be hearing from the pulpit, and how should people of faith who are attending church, and I hope that they are back to church, how should we be discussing leadership, politics, policy, and all of these issues on a weekly basis from church?
Yeah, it's good. So I think the first thing that pastors need to do better is teach on authority, the authority structure. In Luke chapter 7, Jesus he marveled at the understanding of how things worked when the centurion came up to him and said, Lord, would you heal my servant, right? And the Lord says, take me to him. And he says, you don't need to do that. I'm a centurion. I'm a man of authority. I'm under authority. I recognize authority. You, Jesus, have all authority. I can recognize that in you. All you got to do is say the word and it'll happen, because I say to this Roman soldier, go, and he goes, and I say to this one, come, and he comes. And Jesus says, everyone, I want you guys to recognize what just happened here. This guy gets how everything works better than anyone in all the Jewish, day, right? Like any of the Jews that were studying the scripts of the prophets and the Torah, you guys missed it. This guy's a Gentile. He doesn't know anything about Judaism, and he gets how the kingdom of heaven works better than anything else. And so what happened in COVID was that pastors didn't understand the authority that God had set up in America. So every nation is an authority structure, and they're all different based on what God allows. The Bible says the Lord raises up authority and he sits it down, right? He's the one who establishes authority. Romans 13 tells us this, right? And so I heard pastors say to me, hey, Micah, during the shutdown, during COVID, we have to shut down because the government official told us, the health department told us, the mayor told us, the governor told us, or the whoever told us to shut down. And so we have to do it, because if we didn't, we would be outside of God's authority per Romans 13. And I would look at these pastors and say, you're so dumb. You are so dumb. You don't know the authority structure in this nation. The government official is not the authority. They are not the authority. First of all, go back and look. It's we the people. You're the sovereign citizen. You're at the top of the totem pole. Underneath that is a constitution, and then underneath that is the government official. And by the way, everything that we believe comes from God's word itself, according to our founding fathers. So it really goes, authority is God's word, then we the people, then the Constitution, and then the politician. By the way, the Constitution is not the law that governs the individual. It's the law that governs those who govern. Right? That's what the Constitution is. And so I said, when you went along with a faulty politician who said something outside of the authority structure that God had set up. Because when a politician said you had to shut down your churches, he was saying something that was not within his purview and the authority to do so. He broke God's authority because the Constitution strictly forbids that. And so, pastor, when you went along with this shepherd who led you over here, he led you outside the bounds of authority. Guess what happened? You unknowingly just broke Romans 13 and you didn't even know it. And so God's going to punish you for that. Just, ignorance isn't, you can't plead ignorance. It's still sin. You still broke God's law. You still broke what God said in Romans 13. And pastors would look at me like, oh crap, like I never thought of that. And I said, that's the problem. You never thought of that. You were ignorant. You were stupid. You were dumb, right? And when a shepherd is dumb, what happens? The wolves eat the sheep. And so shepherds, you can't be dumb. You got to know this stuff. You got to study the American legal system. You got to study our authority structure. You have to know our history. Don't just think, oh, separation of church and state. That's the one phrase, political phrase, every pastor in America knows. And do you know what? That political phrase is found nowhere in our founding documents. You can't find it in the Declaration. You can't find it in the Constitution. You can't find it in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. You can't find it anywhere. It's in one private letter that Thomas Jefferson writes to a pastor in 1802, and it goes off the rails in the mid-1940s because a crazy KKK Supreme Court justice wanted the church out of his business. That's where that came from. And so pastors, if you think separation of church and state is an actual thing, you don't know the history. And Hosea 4:6, I said it earlier, my people perish for lack of knowledge. So the best thing churches can do right now is to get pastors who understand the times and know what to do about it. Just like the sons of Issachar in the Old Testament. They were men who understood the times and they knew what to do about it. I think there's a whole lot of pastors have no idea. I just had a debate with a pastor. I used to work with him at this big church I worked at just yesterday. And we were going back and forth on Islam. He was so mad I said, I hate Islam. And I said, hold on a second, Wayland, you don't hate Islam? And he said, no, I don't hate Islam. And I said, well, that's interesting because God says to hate evil and love good. You don't think Islam's evil? He said, well, there's evil in Christianity. People do evil things in Christianity and Muslims do evil things. And I said, well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, bro, the ideology. Would you say Nazism's evil? Would you say pedophilia is evil? Would you say anything is evil? And that's a pastor in Indiana who thinks, oh, we need to love everyone, which means we have to accept every ideology, every lie, every evil, and then we are going to overcome evil with evil, right? That's what they believe. And so this is the problem. And I'm like, this is why the sheep are getting devoured. And I told this guy, I said, you are a weak man. I said, you're the frustration that I have with the American church. We have weak men leading the American church right now. God, where are the Gideons? Where are the Davids? Where are the Samsons? Where are these men that should be like, I'm going to run out. I'm going to face evil. I'm going to know what's evil first, but then I'm going to face evil. I'm going to fight and destroy evil in the name of Jesus Christ. Just like David ran towards Goliath, speaking the truth of heaven. You come at me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come at you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies. Like, that's what we need from our pastors. And we have these wussies as pastors, and then we look around and we're like, oh, I wonder why America's suffering. Well, because you have pastors who don't know what time it is in any shape or form, and then they think they're more virtuous when they say, we're just going to stay out of politics. We're just going to love everybody, and it will all be good. Well, it hasn't been working very well. If you look around, it seems like we're going the opposite way we need to be going. When schools don't even know which bathrooms boys and girls should use today, pastor, you probably aren't being very effective. I'm just gonna point to that and rest my case.
Well, amen and amen to everything you just said. I'm sending this episode to every pastor and faith leader I know, and we've got that list. We've got a long list, Micah. You're so right. You know, this is a nationwide problem we are having, not just in the church and faith communities, but on Capitol Hill too. And this whole movement to bring down masculine, traditional men, to feminize them, to call everything about how God made them toxic, right? It's really caused a lot of problems, and you just outlined them with a lot of, I think strength, but also with a lot of insight into really getting to the heart of what the problem is here. So I thank you for saying that. I want you to leave us, Micah, with one thing. You're in Indiana. I'm out here in California, but this audience is all across the United States. You're so just chock full of wisdom and understanding about how faith and politics intersect. So I love interviewing people just like you. You're amazing. And I want you to leave the listeners with just one message you wish you could convey to all Americans as a whole.
Yeah, well, I would say you have to be able to discern between good and evil today, right? And I said it a little bit earlier, but don't freak out though, because I think a lot of people think I'm not good at this stuff. Like, I hate history, I hate politics. Someone might be saying I just hate all of it. I'm just not good at it. Hey, praise God, because you don't have to be good at it, because he's made some really good resources for you that are available for you. I think of Rick Green in the Patriot Academy. Go and just type in the Patriot Academy. Go and find Rick Green stuff. I think of David Barton, right? David Barton is a master at breaking down American history, what Christians should be doing, how to do it. David and Tim Barton over at Wall Builders, wallbuilders.com. I think of the TPUSA Faith guys, right? Like the Chad Connollys in Faith Wins, right? These are godly people who are equipping you, just the average Christian. You don't even have to be a pastor, just the average Christian, to know how to engage in this battle that we're in right now. They'll teach you the biblical principles. They'll teach you how to use those biblical principles practically. And then all you got to do is just show up. Right? You'll be equipped, and just show up. Start going to political things. Show up at a council meeting. Show up at a party meeting, and just show up. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not hard to be the person that ends up leading the charge someday, or just being very influential even behind the scenes, if you just show up, because it's politics. This isn't an Aerosmith concert. It's not like you're trying to get in and tickets are gone, right? This is politics. Like, if you want a ticket to the Lincoln Day, I promise you, there's going to be thousands available, right? Like, you're not, this is not hard to do. And so, so all of that to say, just show up, and God will use you, and it'll blow your mind. If you would have told me in 2016, hey, Micah, you showing up and just starting to speak truth is going to lead to you being, in 10 years, you're going to be the lieutenant governor. Actually, in 8 years, you would have been the lieutenant governor. I would have been like, no way, but God, right?
Well, I loved this conversation so much, and I'm just sitting here thinking, in a world that is so full of division and hurt and darkness and chaos, and full of people like the Graham Plattners and the James Tallaricos of the world, be a Micah Beckwith. You're a wonderful inspiration to all of us, and I hope that you will come back on the show again. I definitely want to have further conversations. There were a number of questions we didn't get to today, but I loved hearing your story. You're so inspirational, and God is always your North Star in everything that you're doing, and we have learned so much of just about how to move in this world from you. So, Micah, thank you for the time today. And we're praying for great things for you to continue, and we're grateful to you and for you.
Hey, thank you, Kyle. So good to be with you, and keep up the great work. I love what you're doing, and you've got a huge voice. So just thank you for being out on the front lines of the battle and doing what God's called you to do.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you so much. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Politically Basic. We're committed to breaking down the basics so that you get to decide. Be sure to check us out on all socials at Politically Basic and at politicallybasic.com for more and for all episodes, and we look forward to seeing you next time.